Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I am Gemma Files. And this, of course, is No
No
Darkness,
darkness, but
but
ours.
ours.
Our last three podcasts explored folk horror in fiction and film. And in the second of them, you might remember our discussing the excellent work of George Popov. Through Rubicon Films, the production company he set up with writer and producer Jonathan Russell, Popov has so far directed the Sideworld series of documentaries and the feature films HEX and The Droving. Gemma and I admired all these films greatly, particularly The Droving, so we were delighted when not only George, but also Daniel Oldroyd, the lead actor in HEX and The Droving, agreed to chat to us about the films. Our apologies to Dan for some technical issues which may have left his voice sounding a bit distorted. Anyway, here are our guests, George Popov and Dan Oldroyd, in this special edition of No Darkness But Ours.
So, anyway, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to any of the guys have had a chance to listen to any previous editions of the podcast with.
I just did the previous one, the MR James one, and you both are fiercely intelligent, and I don't know how me and Dan will compete, but we'll give it a shot.
Very well. No,
not very well.
No. Well, neither of us have made films, so there's that.
He's quite clever for an actor, and I'm quite stupid for a director. So I think we're
kind of on the same level, kind of. I mean, we've just done one about folk horror, which we chatted for about 2 hours, and so it's even cutting out all my waffling, it broke down into about 40 to 45 minute sections. So the first one of those up, the droving gets discussed in the second one.
Yeah.
With one of those awkward conversations, because obviously we want to tell people how much we love this film without giving away too much, because obviously one of the things we really liked about it was I actually delayed watching it for a while because I think I can guess where this is going to go. He's going to go looking for his sister, and he's going to be like Wicker Man or something like that. And of course, it goes in a totally different direction. But
that's right.
Explaining why you love it without spoiling it for.
I mean, don't worry. That boat has sailed a long time. I've spoiled it myself a few times, but no, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Obviously.
Yeah.
The thing that occurred to me rewatching HEX and The Droving is that both of them obviously fall into that rubric, that category of folk horror, but particularly because they seem to be constructed around a certain type of landscape. Would you say that's true? That you find the landscape and shape the idea to it?
That's a very accurate assessment, because I think I was thinking about the landscape, and we had the landscape before we had all the points in both of these stories. If anything, the stories are inspired by the landscapes in some ways. I mean, we had some at different stages. It was different with HEX and then with The Droving, but it was absolutely the stories weren't in their final form and how they were going to go until we knew where we were. And particularly, I mean, just to one of the cleanest examples is the scene. Well, say a scene. It's kind of like a third of the film. The whole the big sequence with Dan and the hermit. In the in the hut in the bothy. We knew that was a point where that was gonna happen in the story. We knew he's gonna meet a character like this in a certain location, but origin was just some sort of cottage in the field. That's how it was written in the script.
Right.
So when we started looking around the Lake District in terms of what we have in terms of ideas, and I saw that pass, the Honesta Pass that we have in the film, that we have the car going through it, and I said well, that's going in, and I know what the shots are going to be, and I was like, whatever's happening, he has to go through there. I don't even care if he goes into the mountains. We need to go through there.
Just right through there.
Absolutely, because it just seemed like it was like this natural threshold of him kind of. I wanted with every kind of visual piece of the film for him to be almost going back in time in a way. Before the picture got dark again, and then we were coming back into the town in the end. So it needed to become more and more primordial as we're moving away. So, but originally what was conceived in the script is just kind of like a boring, plain when we saw those bothies, those huts for all the walkers and climbers out there, it's just like, well, it has to happen there because it's so isolated and there's nowhere where we can go. And because we knew that what the twist of the scene was and what we're going to reveal more and more about Martin, we wanted to initially people to think that we're putting him in danger more, but then after that.
Yeah, exactly.
It
really was one of those, no, you're locked up in here with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very Rorschach moment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
very Rorschach moment. It reminded me to some degree of, I mean, we knew that his sister had gone hiking with these people, and it reminded me of to some degree of the Appalachian Trail, which also has a series of little, not quite bothies, but little cottages here and there, or little huts here and there for people to sleep in, and very, very creepy pasta. I met this strange man on the Appalachian Trail.
Just down for a second, because you've thinking about the bothy scene, because that is, I mean, for me, that's the absolute heart of the film, because that's when you kind of your understanding of what you thought there's what you thought this was all about, and then there's what it's really about. And it's but it's quite long, complex scenes, a lot of shifts in turn. It's all, I mean, the whole film really has to be carried by the actor playing Martin, and
exactly
did an amazing job of that. I mean, was that, I can imagine that being quite a, I mean, how did you approach that scene? Because you've got to go through a lot of shifts and reveal a lot of different layers to the character.
God, it was a hard one. I think it was because we actually, I mean, we talked, me and George and Johnny I talked a lot about it. We talked a lot about the sort of the influences of the character, and I think a lot of the things that George always says to me is that we talk about certain films and like to watch those and see what the sort of colours that you can get from those different sort of characters. And I think for Martin, it was a couple of films like the Jake Gyllenhaal's character in Prisoners and Jason Clarke's character in Zero Dark 30, and even though they are very different characters, it's kind of sort of like big moment, and it was very, very difficult, long scene to film. I think it was just about kind of finding that sort of real menace, and I think that was the main sort of, for me anyway at that time, I think it was the main sort of crux of that scene, because throughout the film he's kind of building and building, and he kind of gets to this point, and this is kind of when he's at his most, you kind of don't, I think from watching it back, I think you kind of at this moment don't particularly like him because of the things that he's doing, even though the hermit is supposed to be this person who's, he thinks has killed his sister, and then it turns out that actually no, that's not the case. He's horrible to this helpless old man. And it was just kind of, I suppose, trying to be as monstrous and diabolical as possible, but without being too over the top with it, I guess, if that makes any sense.
The thing about the Jason Clarke character is that it's a job for him. It's a job, but then at a certain point you go, oh, is it a job or is it a vocation?
Yeah.
Is it sort of like, no, but this is the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
I'm so good at it.
Yeah.
Although even Martin's feeling a bit of like, certainly at the end, there's a hint of remorse about it, about the things I did. Some of them didn't even know the answer that I was after, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've got to admit that at the very end, there was a moment when I thought it was going to go even darker than it did. And I actually thought instead of asking for his sister back, he was going to ask for Simon back to kill him, kill him all over again in a twisted way. I'm kind of glad it didn't go there.
Who knows? Maybe he did do that.
True.
Indeed.
Second on the wish list.
Maybe he changed his mind.
Exactly, but the devil never gives you what you want.
No.
No.
In terms of Hex, such a wonderfully ambitious place to start making a film. On the one hand, it's two guys in a landscape, with a woman going back and forth in the background, but on the other hand, it's like, Yeah, but it's also a field in England. So, yeah. What suggested it to you?
That should be the first film we make.
Yes. Yeah.
Insanity. Just
Okay.
naturally crazy. So that helped. And Johnny's not. He can't overpower me in a conversation. So Jonathan Russell, who we made him together. So I said, and then he agreed. So no. I think it's I like to counterbalance these points because we wanted to make a film that in some way is going to stick with people as the first thing you do.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be rough around the edges. It's going to have moments that you're still learning and you're still trying to do something. But if it was just that level of a story that was all about the characters and was all about the themes and everything, but it was in the room, then there's a lot of other people who have done that.
Yes.
And they're doing that and doing it to a very good degree. And also if it was just about a horror movie in the woods, that was also something that everybody was doing. So I have a passion towards both of these in a way, and we try to do something that's okay. The logistics will be difficult, but in a way, I think what was even more difficult was not that, but the fact that the film digs quite deep, and I think that's
yeah,
because I'm a sort of a big Tarkovsky and Malick fan. The people who can't stand just listening to birds and tree noises for half an hour, but probably tuned out, so they didn't get to the part where the film actually gets really good, and it gets quite deep, and Dan gets insanely good, and everything. So I wouldn't say it's a regret, because I learned a lot of kind of what we're all good at, by pushing the envelope of how artsy the film can be. And then I knew with the droving exactly what the right measurement of that was. At least I think I did. But I'm really glad that the Hex was that ambitious, because you can't really judge the boundaries of something until you sort of push them.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that.
And I'm really glad that we at least got to dig into some themes that I think were quite strong.
It does sort of involve the same kind of reversal to some degree. You're left in this place where it's like, is she a witch? Is she not a witch? Which is always inherent in a witchcraft, particularly a historical witchcraft narrative.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's in a lot of films, you have that in a lot of stories in literature as well, that shift of where obviously where the truth and the fact ends and when the fiction begins about who's a witch and who was claimed to be that. And there's big classics written about that stuff. And to me that was interesting, and I knew that was always going to be a part of the film. But what was even more important to me, and what the story, in my opinion, is really about, is not is she a witch, is she not, and who's right and who's wrong in the political thing, but who's good and who's evil, in this whole story.
Exactly.
And where does evil come from, and where does understanding or prejudice really come from? And it's all about people understanding each other, and in a very perverse way, it's a story about bonding of those two characters.
That's right.
So you get that understanding first, but then you never get to the point where they understand her, or So
well, it's sort of like the only way that they can bind themselves together is against an exterior threat, against a threat that's much bigger than politics. It's evil. It's pure evil.
Going back to Watchmen with the Rorschach, thing. That's Ozzy's good plan, isn't it? And he's very right. That's the only way how you can bring people together, is you have to pose some other external threat that we need to band against. Because otherwise we'll just keep on going against each other.
The Ozymandias gambit.
Dad's character had, where he was like, because I respect you, so I'll be merciful. I'll kill you quickly. That's kind of reminds me a little of there was a monologue the poet Jules Denby did about her cat, and about when she and her partner first moved into this house in Bradford. They had a little kitten, and the kids from the estate, kind of, because they thought they were punk rockers, basically glued a little bit of carpet to its head as a mohawk. And it was like, which was both horrible and kind of funny until they were tried to like remove until they removed it. But she was like saying they were trying to be friendly, but they were from the estate, so their friendly wasn't like anybody else's idea of friendly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like, yeah, I like you, so I'll kill you quickly. Cheers. But there's a lot of kind of, I mean, in a lot of your films, there is this thing where you kind of set up one expectation and then change, and then, I mean, in HEX, and I don't know if it was intentional, but certainly from the visual cues at the beginning, my assumption was that Dan's character would be a roundhead, and William Young was the royalist because of how they were dressed. You know,
Yeah.
Young had the cape and the longer hair, and the sort of the helmet and the general murder of 1,000-yard stare thing that.
Oh, absolutely. No, and this is something that we actually found, like with talking a lot of people who are interested in the period and historians and reenactors and everybody, and they said like, well, those stereotypes weren't as clean cut as people present them to be. Like
Exactly.
fashion wasn't that huge of a distinguishing, thing. Like, in movies you imagine that everybody who's this way was dressed that way, and then like everybody's wearing their little uniform and their little haircut to symbolize their faction of where they come from. But it wasn't as clean as that. So we used this and with Thomas especially, I was thinking a lot of just Hitler Jugend, those kind of angelly boys, blonde with like that scene in Cabaret where the kid sings "Tomorrow Belongs to Me," genius moment. And you look at him and be like, oh yeah, he's gonna be like the wavy fairy, kind of royalist, but or just the good guy, kind of the moral center of the story. And again, in a kind of fucked up way, he is. In a lot of things that he values, he is, but then that just kind of reminds me a lot of how real evil is that you never see someone completely all-rounded evil about every single aspect of life,
Yes.
And mentioning, good old Adolf. I mean, he loved his animals and stuff, and like that was a big part of him. But not a huge fan of human beings.
No,
that's certainly true. Well, again, I think a civil war like that is kind of dictated by geography as well, and I saw it as being very much a guerrilla action section of the British Civil War.
Yeah.
The same way that in Ride with the Devil by Ang Lee, it's very difficult to make those kind of distinctions,
Yeah, no, absolutely, and like there was a lot of royalist supporters in the north, in particular, and it really just made a lot of sense with Dan there because he's such a great northern presence.
Yes, it's true.
How did you two first come to work together?
Well, I originally. It was through Susie Francis Cotton, who plays the witch, and she's the linchpin of everything that's good. It was through her, and Dan originally he auditioned for another film that was supposed to be our first film that we ever made, and that was even more ambitious and crazy. And so if anything, HEX was like the one that made sense, So
Jonathan must have kind of heaved a sigh of relief when you heard you were going for that one instead of the.
Well, no, because it was like with the other one. I remember like this is great, but it's like thinking, oh god, this is pretty. It is pretty big and it is pretty ambitious, and I think it probably would require a bit more of a budget to do it properly justice. But then when George came to me with HEX, I was like, no, this just gave me the treatment. I was like, sounds fantastic. Yeah, I'm all in. Let's play.
No, absolutely. I mean, the thing is because his audition for the other one was so good. Is that the next time we're just thinking about is like, well, we can't not have Dan play like one of the characters, because also I felt like I owed him, like, because it was that project was taking a long time, and he was seemed like such an important and good fit for the previous film. But even outside of that, it just seemed like the right thing to do, and the other film was just And then after that, like, you know, he kept on asking me, oh, George, when we're making it, you know, and I said, like, look, I mean, it's been a few years. I don't know. Like, I have to.
You're too old now.
But we'll do something else together, and that will ended up being the droving. So we never came back to that story because it's just like we outgrew it in a way.
Yeah.
But it was a great just an excuse to meet and work together.
Yeah. So you've been doing this Sideworlds project, and I really loved the first two films. I hear there's a third one coming. But I gotta ask, is there another fiction film hovering on the in the future?
Oh, there always is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we haven't given up on that. So there you can't. You know, it's like the storytelling part of you like really wants to make all these narrative films. So no, Sideworld's been a great adventure and will continue to be, and it's good, kind of managing like a franchise, and like in 1 year we made 3 films, where before in 4 you make 2. You know, it's a different
exactly.
it's a different dynamic. I've never done documentaries before. I don't know the first thing about them aside from watching them, and that was interesting to tackle. And if anything, that was what made interesting Sideworld to me. Not from what I've heard to other people as well, is because I thought of them as as narrative films. I was like, I have to put like the same amount of atmosphere, and the music has to be right, and everything has to, the stories have to be interesting. But it still came from the same passion for storytelling that it came from HEX and the Droving, because those were little folklore stories and horror stories and paranormal things and unsolved mysteries and all of that are very closely related and in any way inspired, kind of quote unquote our own folklore that we made up with HEX and the Droving. And you, out of all of them, you can make a film, but you would need 50,000 lifetimes to be able to tell all these stories. So you can't, and not all of them are probably worthy of 90 minutes. So that's why we started grouping them by theme and making this series. So we're nowhere near close stopping with Sideworld, and we're quite in the thick of it right now. And there's all the things that we're building. And the last one you said, the third one, Sideworld, Damnation Village, which is about haunted villages and all that.
Nice.
We have 3 great sections there. It's going to be coming out now around Halloween, and that's going to be great. But in the background, all the notebooks with all the narrative films, they're getting filled as well. I kind of sometimes I cheat on Sideworld with those, and so there is a lot of there's stuff coming in, and there might be in a case in which those 2 universes might also crisscross in some way. So, but we'll see.